Are you a businesswoman who's finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. If you want to see how your presentation skills are doing, please go to our free 4-minute assessment at www.speakforresultsquiz.com. Elizabeth uses her 30 years of experience as an opera director to help business professionals become better presenters. This special series explores the relationship between business and art. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. This is the special series, The Relationship Between Business and Art. And I am so delighted to have Valerie Day, the rock singer, with us today. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. Speakers Who Get Results is a podcast all about presentation skills and how we can use presentation skills to move an audience to take action. This particular series is the relationship between art and business and the things, because in my business, I'm using what I learned in the arts, 30 years in the arts, now for business purposes. And I think it's the same thing. It's just different vocabulary, right?
Right.
Yeah. So Valerie Day is an old friend. I've known her for a very long time. She was a classmate of my younger sister. So when we first knew each other, she was one of those kids who hung around with my little sister, and I was 3 whole years older. So I was way, didn't want to think about the little ones. And then she's gone on to have this fabulous, huge career. And it's really fun to be reconnecting as adults, as we both had several careers in the meantime, since we, when you're 19 and you think you've got it all figured out, you know how it all is supposed to go. Let me start out with Valerie's official bio, or pieces of it, because it's actually quite extensive, but I'll tell you a little bit of it, which is singer, educator, and arts advocate Valerie Day has a continental savoir-faire command of American popular song, an assured honey alto delivery, a fierce sense of activism, and an alluring next-door gravitas that has echoes of another day gone by. With her balance of authority, emotional immediacy, and here and now intimacy, Valerie is more than a little bit of a 21st century Doris Day. She's a gifted vocalist, she's a skilled percussionist, and a passionate advocate for arts education, and indeed a generous artist of uncommon talent and dedication. Valerie was born into the 4th generation of a musical Northwestern family. And I knew her mother, who was an opera singer. So that's another connection we have. She was blessed to be raised amid a supportive, arts-rich home life. Her supportive musical mother, that's the opera singer I was talking about, paved the way for a fantastic journey from ground zero trajectory of 80s pop and R&B chartdom with the band New Shoes. That's Nushooz. And they had a dance track called I Can't Wait, which reached number 3 on the pop charts in the US out of how many hundreds of thousands. She was also on the top 10 in Europe and Britain. And New Shoes was nominated for a Grammy as Best New Artist in 1987. She also went on to sing jazz, big band, and orchestral performances with the Oregon Symphony, Woody Height, Tom Grant, and many other greats. And now she has a dynamic career as a celebrated voice, talent, educator, inspiration to inspiring young artists. So we talk about, careers follow a path. And then there's always the unexpected one, which was in 2013. The band New Shoes was invited to be part of the Freestyle Explosion Tour, with other 80s hit acts. And it was such a huge success that New Shoes is now performing as a live band and touring the world. So full circle, right?
Yes, it's that circle of life kind of thing, for sure. And very unexpected, actually.
I think it's a very cool story. It's really fun. I'm just really so happy to have you. But Valerie also has a podcast called A Vocal Life, or Living a Vocal Life.
That's right.
Living a Vocal Life, with really, really, really good interviews for anyone who's interested in singing as a career. I also have to ask you, this is something I ask all my guests. If you had a chance to have a dream interview with somebody from history, who would it be? What would you ask them about? And who ought to be listening?
Well, I'm always thinking about my podcast audience and the kinds of things that would be helpful to them. One of the things that I came across a lot when I was teaching, because I had my own private studio where I taught for 20 years, is that people were afraid of or had been discouraged from singing different styles of music that were really opposite from each other, say jazz and classical. There's an opera singer. Well, she's mostly known for opera, I think. Her name's Eileen Farrell.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a career in the 50s, maybe even earlier than that, 40s, 50s, 60s, and sang professional opera at a time when if you tried to do any other kind of music, if you were an opera singer, people just thought you were going to ruin your voice.
Oh, yeah.
And so
she was a Canadian mezzo-soprano, right?
Right. Yeah. And so at a certain point in her career, she loved jazz and decided to make a record. And I think the one that I've heard is called I Can Sing the Blues or something like that. I have a right to sing the blues. I think that's the title of the record. She does the best job of anybody I've ever heard singing both styles without an accent, I would say. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by accent is, my mom, who was, as you said, a classical singer, when I first started learning jazz, she'd come down to the basement where I was practicing and she'd say, well, I can sing the blues. And she'd say, oh, I can sing the blues. And I'd be like, no, Mom. Sorry, you can't.
Right.
But Eileen Farrell really, I used her as an example for my students to say, you can sing any style of music that you want to. You just have to learn the language. And here's someone who did it really, really well. And everyone who was in the opera world said, you're going to ruin your voice. And she didn't, because she had good technique for both styles. And technique is technique. So anyway, I'd love to talk with her, and I'd love to ask her, about how she managed to sing both those styles so authentically, and then how she dealt with the criticism and the pushback on doing the things that she wanted to.
Yeah, in some ways, it's easier for the lower voices, of course, because especially the lower female voices, because most of jazz is written for belter. I'm thinking like music comedy terms of, the belter, as opposed to, you can actually talk about that more than I can, better than I can, since you're the one who's the professional singer. But out of curiosity, you were raised by, your father was a musician and your mother was a professional opera singer. What was it like for you to sing rock, to go into popular music?
Well, I never thought I was going to be a singer, first of all, because my mom had a world-class voice and that was what she did. And so I was going to do something different. So I kind of came to it through the back door. I became a percussionist first. And
you started with calypso, right?
Latin music. Yeah. Afro-Cuban, actually. And so I played congas and timbales and all kinds of hand percussion. And I sang backup vocals. And I loved doing that because I love singing harmony. I love the feeling of those frequencies rubbing up against each other when people sing together. There's nothing like it. So we had another lead singer, and I was always in the background because I was also kind of introverted and shy and had incredible performance anxiety. So being in the back was totally fine for me. But then he started missing gigs. And so because he was captured by cocaine. And so I had to step in and take on more of the lead role. So that was one of my first pivots, actually, was stepping out front and singing more. As for singing rock, I actually didn't sing rock. I sang mostly, I would say, pop, R&B. I loved jazz. So all of the music that actually comes from the African American tradition in our country.
And of course,
places.
you had a decent vocal technique.
Not at first.
Not at first.
Actually, when I stepped out to sing lead vocals more often, we were playing between 2 and 5 nights a week, 4 hours a night. And I was trying to sing over a really loud band, and I got nodules really fast.
And now for those who don't know, talk about what nodules are.
Nodules are little calluses on your vocal cords. And when your vocal cords rub together, that's what happens when you rub tissue on tissue. It creates a callus to protect itself. And then the vocal cords become stiff and they can't stretch. I could barely talk during the day. I had them so badly. So
I mean, just quickly ask, is that, you hear Janis Joplin, who talks like this, or Bill Clinton, who talks like this. Is that calluses on the vocal cord?
It can be many different kinds of things. It can be polyps, which it can be scar tissue. It can be just drying. Bill Clinton talks in the lower part of his voice and without very much support. You can tell that he's not lifting in and up when he's talking. He's just kind of letting it all hang out. And he's trying to create emotional connection. So when you talk down here and you're just talking for emotional connection, you're kind of quiet, you can hear how my voice gets gravelly. This is called vocal fry. And it's really common in our culture right now. And it drives me crazy because when I hear it, I know that those vocal cords are rubbing together and they're creating damage. It's actually, if you're talking like that all day, it can really be bad for singing and talking.
It's actually something that women do when they're trying to sound more authoritative.
Yes.
Is they'll pitch their voices low and then they lose their voice. It's easy to lose your voice that way.
Yeah.
So you got calluses on your vocal cords and you were singing 5 nights a week, 4 hours a night?
So I went to get voice lessons, and I took from a classical teacher who didn't really have any clue as to what was going on with me, and I got worse. And that was really frustrating because I knew that if I quit and the vocal cords healed by themselves, it usually takes a few months. If I went back with the same technique, it would happen all over again. Plus, we had gigs. We were lucky. We were playing all the time.
You had contracts, yeah.
Yes, we had to perform. We can't, the show must go on. So luckily, a bartender at one of the clubs that I played at told me about a voice teacher named Tom Blaylock in Portland, who I went to, and I knew from the very first lesson that he was going to be able to help me. He knew so much about the physiology and anatomy of the voice. And he had me doing exercises where, I would go out and I'd tear my voice apart, but every week it kept getting a little better, a little better, a little better. Tissue in the vocal cords regenerates really fast. All the tissue does in your mouth. And so that's a good thing because within a year and a half, that vocal cord nodule sloughed off and my voice was clean and clear, and I had good technique. I was a natural singer, so before this, it was a good thing that this happened because before I had nodules, I really didn't know how to sing. I just always had.
Yeah. Well, that's actually, it's a fascinating story. Let's talking a little bit about how this applies, how it's like any other kind of business. I was wondering, you were, when you were you were the babe in the band.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have to do any of the negotiating? Did you have to walk into a producer's office and say, take us seriously, take me seriously as the spokesperson for the band?
I did.
What was that like?
In the very early days, our lead singer was really a great salesperson. And he could go into any club and get them to hire us. I mean, he had charisma in that way. Because I have trouble, I can sing, I can perform in front of people. I do get nervous, but I get more nervous when I'm talking to people.
As do we all, actually. Yeah.
Yes. There's a lot going on when you're in a conversation with someone on many different levels, and I get overwhelmed and overstimulated. So, I was not the best person to do sales for the band, but I was really organized. So I did create marketing materials and then go and leave them at different clubs. And I did do phone work. It was not easy. And I really didn't like doing it, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. So when we were still, I think we were just about 2-3 years in, another bartender who was also working on the side as a promoter for jazz acts around town, wanted to be our
around
manager.
Town. And I say this is Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon. Yes.
Which has a very vibrant live music scene.
Yes. It still does to this day.
So there was a bartender who was also a promoter, right?
Yes. And he wanted to be our manager. So it was with great relief that I relinquished those managerial marketing type jobs to him so I could just concentrate on the music.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about pivoting today and having had various careers. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like when New Shoes, this is the band Nushooz, New Shoes. New Shoes was a big hit in the 1980s, nominated for a Grammy, all that stuff. And then the world moved on. What was that like? You had to reinvent yourself.
We kind of, all along the way, I knew that we were in a business, first of all, that had no point A to point B. It was a miracle that we got on the radio in the first place. It was a miracle that the songs that were singles did anything at all, let alone go into the top, 20 or top 40 of Billboard, the Billboard charts. Mm-hmm. So all along the way, I felt like I knew that the trajectory would be up and then down, and that I needed to create some kind of internal foundation that was solid so that I would be able to make that ride work for me and not end up totally depressed and not able to move forward after that happened. Which
happens to so many people if they've, it's kind of like being fired without the clarity of getting a pink slip. You've just, exactly. It's just that the phone stops ringing.
Yeah. And we had a record deal we had played in clubs for 7 years. Then we got a record deal with Atlantic. And then we'd been on Atlantic Records for 7 years, recorded 3 records, 2 of which came out. The third one did not. So after 4 years of working on it, they put out a single. It didn't do well, and they dropped the record. And so there was the heartbreak of that. 4 years of working on a creative project. We wrote over 100 songs for that record, and no one ever heard it. So there was that. And then there was going to New York and trying to meet with the label and having the person that was in charge, the A&R person who's in charge of
A&R is artist and
repertoire. So they're the liaison between you and the record company.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman who was in charge of us at that time, we had 3 different A&R people, because their heads are always on the chopping block. If they work for the artist too much, then they're fired. But
Mm-hmm.
so most of them are more on the side of the record. This is in the old days, so it
Mm-hmm.
probably is. Anyhow, the pivot was tough, because after losing that record deal, it was, well, let's see, what am I qualified to do? I'm qualified to either go out there and perform in front of thousands of people, or bus tables at the local coffee shop, because that was the job that I had before.
That's
We got a
exactly
record
what
deal.
happened to me, actually, when I thought,
Really?
yeah. Actually, at one point, when I had, it happened to me first right out of college, where I spent a year working in New York City as working as 50% of the staff of a small touring opera company. And the first show was fabulous, and the second show was so horrible that I thought, this is what I've been working for my whole life, and
Right.
I hate it.
Oh,
And
no.
yeah, and I came home to Portland, Oregon, and said, what else do I know how to do? I can bus tables. Things
So,
like,
yeah, your
yeah,
choices were about the same as mine.
about the same as yours. And actually, that was when I really met your mother, because I fell into a production of Don Giovanni that Portland Opera was doing, where your mother was singing Zerlina. And that was
Yes.
where that was the turnaround in me. I said, okay, I guess I'll do opera after all. But your
How
mom was part of that.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. I did not know that. How
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. Love
Yeah.
that story.
Anyway, so for you, it was, you were going to bus tables. If you weren't going to be in the band, what were you going to do?
And our manager did come to us and say, John and I'm married to the songwriter and the guitarist in the band. He came to us and said, do you want me to try to get you another record deal? And the joy of making music had been so expunged. I don't know if that's the right word, but it had been sucked out of us.
It
So
wasn't fun anymore.
it wasn't fun anymore. And if music's not fun, you really can't. I mean, you can only fake it to a certain point.
Yeah.
And then it's time to say, let's do something else. And there were many other kinds of music, actually, that we wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a couple of years trying to figure things out, and ended up deciding to go ahead and teach, because I had been rescued by learning technique, correct vocal technique, and I wanted to be able to pass that on to other singers who were having difficulty. So I became a voice teacher and had my own private studio for 20 years while we raised our son Malcolm.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking earlier about the choices, especially for women. And we're recording this during the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, where there are many women who are having to choose about, you can have a job or a child, but not both.
Mm-hmm.
You said something about your mother making that decision?
Yes. Actually, the decision was kind of made for her in one case. She was, as I said, a world-class lyric soprano, and she won the West Coast Metropolitan Opera auditions, performed with the Oregon Symphony, the Seattle Symphony, did all kinds of musical theater. And she also won some other prizes. And I can't remember the name of the one that I read about. I found a newspaper clipping with a picture of her and these 2 other singers. And they had won, she had come in first, and then there was number 2 and number 3 singer for this prize. And even though my mom had won the prize, they decided to give it to the runner-up, because she didn't have children and she didn't have a family that she had to take care of. So this is the kind of world that she was in. And my dad was a physician and was very busy, and had his whole life and wanted hers life to revolve around his, and then take care of the children. And so I really don't even know how she had time. She wasn't very good at time management anyway. I don't know how she had time to do this whole, memorize all all these performance, roles that she was in performances. It was
But
a
it's,
difficult time.
that's the fundamental equivalent of giving the promotion to the man because they know he has a family to support, and not giving it to the woman because they figure she's going to drop out and have kids anyway.
Right.
Which is something
Right.
that we are still battling nowadays.
I know. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's progress has been made, but not enough.
Yeah. Well, I keep thinking of it as a spiral. It's like we are spiraling and we get a little bit better, and then we sort of go around and, we hit the same problem again, but maybe it's just a little better each time.
Yeah.
I think about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that's a little too defeatist for me. It's easy for me to get discouraged, so I would rather not think of the steps back, but I'd rather think of like the spiral. We're working our way up, but it's not all at the high point every time.
I love that image actually, because I use it with my students, or I used to use it with my students, because we constantly have to relearn. And that's how we cement the knowledge. And it is a spiral, because each time that you come back around, you are getting better at whatever it is that you're doing. It just doesn't feel like that sometimes. As you come back around,
that whole thing about,
this again, what happened,
Wait a minute. Haven't I already dealt with this? Yes.
I thought I checked this off the list.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. How do you... Well, then the next thing that happened was after a while, because it wasn't just the next thing, but after a while you had your life as a teacher and an advocate for the arts and all of that. And then you were invited to go out on sort of an 80s rerun tour. It's not a nice way to say it, but music of the 80s. Guess what? You're doing oldies. Who knew?
Yes. Which we said we'd never do. When we were younger and we'd see the signs along the highway, come see some 70s artists.
Yes.
Right. At the casino, and we'd be like, never going to do that. That's, pathetic. And actually we got calls to do that as Malcolm was growing up, and we were like, nope, done with New Shoes, not going to go back, always forward, we have other music projects to do, which I was singing jazz, and that felt really good to be kind of another circle of life thing, coming back to this style of music that I loved. And there's so many wonderful jazz musicians in Portland, Oregon that I got to perform with. We finally said yes when Malcolm graduated from high school, and we'd been getting calls for several years. And one of the agents called and said, these shows are really fun. The audiences love the music. You get to travel a little, just try a few and see what you think. And so we did, and we got hooked, because it's kind of like going to your high school reunion, 30 years later, and people are just glad to be alive. And most of the bullshit is kind of dropped from the interactions, and it's just lovely to be able to be with people. And we fly, we go into a city for a couple nights, we tour in the afternoon, we go to a museum or two, and then we do 3 or 4 songs in our set, and we're done and fly home again. So we were weekend warriors for 7 years. And it feels like especially during this COVID-19 time, obviously we're not performing. These were big arenas with 10,000 people or more. And I think we're at this point where we've done that enough now that it's time to remake ourselves once again. And that is actually always an exciting moment, I think. After doing it so many times, I feel like there's a point where the thing that you were doing doesn't give you the juice that it used to. And when you stop having fun, when you've pushed past that point of maybe where there's some kind of stickiness in whatever it is that you're doing, and you push past that point and you get to the other side, and you've done that enough times where you know that you can't do it anymore. it's time to move on. And luckily, I feel energized about the next iteration of myself. So, I wake up every day and I'm working on these courses for singers that are online. They're going to be launched this fall of 2020. And I'm writing about all of the experiences that I've had and putting them on my blog and as a teacher and as a performer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just excited to help the next generation because it's not an easy thing.
So what could you say to people who are, who find themselves having to pivot and it wasn't their idea? Basically, either they've lost a job or they were doing great in an industry that's currently shut down, like catering or events or something. What sort of perspective can you give, having been through it several times? What kind of perspective can you give to people who are hurting?
That's a really good question, because it is different when, like the first time around when we lost our record deal, that was not our choice. There was, I would say to people who are going through that kind of experience where it hasn't been their choice, that you have to let the grief be a part of the experience for a moment. Just, allow yourself to feel all the feels all the feelings that come with that. Not to be necessarily overwhelmed by them, but just to allow them to be there. And sometimes you have to hold the grief in one hand while you're scrambling with the other hand to try to figure out what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to create something called success scaffolding.
You said something about success scaffolding. What do you mean by that?
Jonathan Fields is a wonderful thought leader, and he came up with this whole 8 P's of success scaffolding. And basically, please, just if you're in a moment where you're having to pivot, go look it up. It's amazing. The 8 P's of success scaffolding are plan, purpose, people, possibility, proof, progress, and pledge. And basically what you're doing is you're visualizing your outcome, you're finding your purpose, which is also really important, I think. And you're finding people to help you, to support you as you're moving through this next time. From people who can be your champion or your cheerleader to people who are doing the same thing you are. And so you're in the same place as you're trying to move ahead. And then, of course, there's mentors and coaches and community, because community also is really important. And people need proof. Proof is that you can do it, that it's actually possible. And we need micro steps of that process to provide the proof. And we need it from people we trust. So then we have to just take action and figure out, it's all an experiment. Sometimes you just have to experiment a bunch of times before you actually land on something that works, because it brings your gifts, your talents, your experience to a part of the world that needs it. And that's when those two things meet, magic happens.
It's one of those things I remember noticing in my 40s when I was working with a lot of younger people, and you'd see the ones whose careers were on their way up and they hadn't yet had a big failure.
Mm-hmm.
And, those were often the ones who were so busy talking, they had no time to listen. Or actually their job was to listen to me, because it was my job to tell them what to do. And just saying, just wait. And then a couple years later, you'd come around and you'd see them again. And they had actually they'd had a disaster. They'd really screwed up. They'd learned that you can survive from it. And then they'd moved on. And that was so much easier to work with them, that sort of thing. And I'm sure I plagued the people, my mentors as well, in the days where I was sure I knew everything. So
you have to, that is definitely something that everyone I think has to go through, because you have to have that feeling like you know everything in order to go out in the world and try,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then those first two big hits that come, and those those first few failures, they are so rough. I would not trade. I just turned 60, and I would not trade this moment for any other in my life, because I feel like I haven't seen everything. I know that I don't know a lot, but I've seen enough that I feel like I can relax a little bit in knowing that there is a cycle to these things. I will figure it out.
It is a spiral.
There is a spiral. We are all naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And that is my mantra. When I'm talking to other people, whether I'm talking to my son and he's 25, and I'm trying to help him with something, I try to come at that conversation with, he is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. That means that he can figure it out. And if I have that belief in him, he's going to be able to access his own inner knowing. And I also say that to myself, that when I am feeling, because I still get performance anxiety. I probably always will, but I know that I can move through it, and because I've done it enough times. Mostly, I guess what I'd say to other people too, who are going through a moment of big transformation, is that it does get easier the more you practice whatever it is that you're doing. And just have to get up and go and do it every day.
That was actually Valerie Day. I think that's a great thing to end on, is to think about yourself as being naturally resourceful, creative, and whole. I love that. I'm going to put that up on my wall as one of the things I want to remember. Valerie Day, thank you so much for being part of Speakers Who Get Results. And it's really fun to have you here.
Thank you.
This has been Elizabeth Bachman, your host. If you enjoyed this, please go to YouTube and leave a comment. That helps people notice us. You could like us on iTunes, tell your friends, leave us a review, and I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.